The day they introduced him, I was in the middle of reviewing a subcontractor bid. Someone knocked on my office door. Not my office, technically. A glass-walled room they let me use because I'd been running the field operations for 8 years and needed somewhere to spread out the project binders. My name wasn't on the door. Never had been. I'd stopped thinking about that a long time ago. My boss. I'll call him the owner because that's what he was. Owner of a mid-sized commercial construction firm in the Carolinas, about 90 employees, 30 million in annual revenue. He knocked and said, "Hey, come on out. Want you to meet someone." I followed him to the main conference room. There was a young man standing at the head of the table. Maybe 28, 29. Nice suit, the kind you wear when you're trying to look like you've been in the industry longer than you have. He had the owner's jaw, the owner's posture. I knew the second I saw him. "This is my son," the owner said. "He's coming on board as senior operations director." I shook the kid's hand. His name was Gavin. Firm grip, rehearsed smile. I said it was good to meet him. He said he'd heard a lot about me. The owner was beaming. I walked back to my glass room, picked up the subcontractor bid, and sat there staring at the numbers without reading a single one. Let me back up. I started at that company when I was 34. Came in as a project manager on a big hospital expansion. 18 months of permits, inspections, union negotiations, and one very serious concrete pour that happened in the middle of a February ice storm because the schedule couldn't slip. I slept in my truck twice that winter. I did not miss a single deadline. After that job, the owner offered me a staff position. I said yes. Over the next 8 years, I built the field operations department from the ground up. When I got there, site supervision was chaos. Different foremen running their own playbooks, no standardized safety protocols, cost overruns on almost every project. I created the systems. I hired most of the people. I trained them. I was on the road 3 weeks out of 4, sometimes more. I had a daughter at home. She was 7 when I started, 15 when Gavin walked into that conference room. I missed a lot of recitals. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself that every year. My title was Senior Project Director. The pay was good, low 6 figures. But for 2 years, maybe longer, there'd been quiet talk about expanding, about adding a VP of Operations position as the company grew. The owner and I had conversations, not formal ones, more like the kind you have over lunch when someone's laying out the future and you're nodding along and filling in details. I was filling in details. I thought that meant something. When Gavin showed up, I understood what it meant. I didn't say anything. That week or the next. I kept doing my job. I handed Gavin the project binder for a hotel renovation we had going in Charlotte. Walked him through the subcontractor relationships, explained the permit timeline. He asked decent questions. I remember thinking, he's not stupid. That almost made it worse. 3 weeks in, the owner called me into his actual office, the big one with the mahogany desk he'd had since the 80s, and told me Gavin would be taking over the Charlotte project as lead. "You'll still be involved," he said. "We just want to give him some visibility." I asked what that meant for my role going forward. He said something about evolving responsibilities. He said my institutional knowledge was invaluable. He said the word invaluable the way people do when they're not going to give you anything valuable. I said, "Are you still planning to create the VP position?" He looked at me for a moment. "We're reassessing the structure." I nodded. I thanked him for his time. I went back to my glass room and I called my wife. She didn't pick up. I sat there with the phone in my hand, listening to the hum of the HVAC until someone walked past and I put it down. Here's what nobody tells you about being passed over. It's not one moment. It's 100 small ones. It's the Monday morning meeting where you start to say something and Gavin finishes the sentence and the owner nods at him. It's the email chain where your name drops off the CC line. It's the company lunch where they seat you at the end of the table and you watch people gravitating toward the head of it. Not because they're asked to, but because that's just how power works. People feel it before they see it. I kept my mouth shut. Partly because I'd been raised that way. My father worked 30 years in a textile mill and never once complained to management about anything. He thought complaining was weakness. I was 42 years old and still carrying that around. And partly, I'll be honest, because I needed the paycheck. My daughter was starting to look at colleges. My wife had gone back to school herself, working on her nursing degree, and we'd reorganized our finances around my income. Rage quitting felt good to imagine. It didn't feel smart to do. So I stayed. And for about 4 months, I watched. Gavin ran the Charlotte Hotel project. It started slipping almost immediately. Not catastrophically, but in the slow, grinding way that experienced people recognize and newer ones don't. 2 weeks behind on drywall installation because he'd approved a change order without checking the subcontractor's availability. A safety write-up from the city because an inspection was scheduled during a phase we hadn't actually completed yet. I saw the weekly reports. I didn't say anything. My boss, the owner, he saw them too. I watched him watch them. He'd frown at his desk. He'd call Gavin in. Gavin would come out looking slightly less confident than when he went in. Then the owner would come find me and ask, very carefully, if I had any thoughts on the Charlotte situation. I did have thoughts. I shared them. Professionally, specifically, without editorializing. I told him the drywall issue could be recovered if we brought in a second crew now rather than waiting. I told him which inspector to call about rescheduling the phase review. I told him what I'd do. He thanked me. He relayed everything to Gavin. Gavin implemented it, the project stabilized. In the next company-wide meeting, the owner praised Gavin's quick thinking and decisive response to the scheduling challenges. I sat at my end of the table. I drank my coffee. My wife started asking me to come home earlier. Not in a demanding way. She just started saying it out loud in the evenings. You seem like you're somewhere else. She was right. I was somewhere else. I was in that conference room every night in my head, replaying that first handshake, trying to find the moment I should have read more clearly. I was 8 years earlier accepting the job, imagining a future that was never actually being offered to me. We weren't fighting. We were just two people sitting in the same house thinking separately. That was its own kind of hard. The thing that finally moved me wasn't the Charlotte project. It was a Friday in November. I was driving back from a site visit in Greensboro 3 hours, late afternoon, low sun in my eyes the whole way. I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. I pulled off at a rest stop to read it. It was from a former client. I'd worked with him 6 years earlier on a warehouse complex, one of the bigger jobs I'd managed. He'd moved on to a new company, a logistics firm expanding their distribution network. He was asking, as quietly as a text message can ask, whether I was happy where I was or whether I'd be open to a conversation. I sat in that rest stop parking lot for about 20 minutes. There were trucks pulling in and out. A family at the picnic tables, kids running around the grass. I watched them. I thought about my daughter. I thought about my father's textile mill. Then I drove home. I didn't call the former client back that night. I didn't call him the next day either. I told myself I was thinking it through. What I was actually doing was waiting to see if I was wrong about everything. If something was going to shift at work. If the owner was going to come to me with something different. He didn't. What happened instead was this. In December, the owner sent out a company-wide email announcing that Gavin was being officially appointed VP of Operations. Effective January 1st. I read it at my desk. I read it twice. Then I printed it out, folded it in half, and put it in the top drawer of my desk. I don't know why I printed it. I just didn't want it on my screen anymore. That afternoon, I texted the former client back. I said I was open to a conversation. We met for lunch in early January. He wasn't looking for a project manager. He was looking for someone to build and run a full operations division. His company was in the middle of a major expansion, 8 new distribution centers over 4 years, and they needed someone who'd done it before, someone who built systems from nothing. He looked at me across the table and said, "You're exactly who I've been trying to find for 2 years." I didn't say yes that day. I went through the formal process, 2 more meetings, a presentation for the executive team, a very detailed conversation about compensation. The number they came back with was 40% higher than what I was making. Plus equity participation in the expansion project, plus an actual VP title, not a reassessed structure. I gave my notice on a Tuesday morning in February. I wrote it out by hand the night before. I've never been great at formal letters, but I didn't want it to sound like a template. I said it had been an honor to build something with the company. I said I was grateful for the opportunities. I said I was moving on for professional reasons. That was all. The owner read it at his desk while I stood there. He looked up at me, and for a moment he looked genuinely surprised, which surprised me, because I thought it must have been obvious. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe he'd gotten so used to me being there that he'd stopped factoring in the possibility that I might leave. He asked if there was anything he could do. I said no. He asked if it was about Gavin. I paused. I said it was about my career. Which was true. I worked my 2 weeks. I trained Gavin, formally, this time, intentionally, on every system I'd built, every vendor relationship, every process. I was thorough. I was professional. I didn't take anything I shouldn't. I didn't say anything I'd regret. On my last day, a few of the guys from the field crews came by the office. Foremen, site supervisors, people I'd worked alongside for years. They brought a grocery store cake, white frosting, blue lettering. They took a photo. I still have it on my phone. I started the new job in March. The first year was hard in ways I hadn't expected. Not bad hard, just demanding. Building something from scratch always is, even when you've done it before. I was hiring, writing policy, doing site visits in 4 different states, sometimes getting on a plane the same day I got home from one. My daughter was a junior in high school by then, and I was doing better about being home. Better than I'd been in years, actually, because the new company had resources that the old one didn't, and I wasn't carrying everything on my back. Something shifted in the way I worked. I wasn't waiting for recognition anymore. I wasn't watching to see if someone noticed. I was building for people who'd already decided I was worth betting on, and that changes everything about how you show up. My wife noticed. She said it once, just once, late on a Sunday night when we were sitting in the kitchen after our daughter had gone to bed. She said, "You look like yourself again." I didn't have an answer for that. I just sat with it. About 8 months into the new job, I started hearing things through the industry network, the kind of information that moves slowly and sideways, through mutual contacts and trade association dinners. The Charlotte Hotel project, the one I'd helped stabilize, had run into new trouble. Different trouble. A key subcontractor had walked off over a payment dispute. Gavin had approved a change in the concrete spec that the structural engineer later flagged. There were cost overruns, real ones this time. The client was unhappy. I heard the owner had called in a consultant. I didn't feel what I thought I'd feel. There was no satisfaction. Mostly, I just felt tired on behalf of everyone involved. The crew on site. The project manager who was probably running themselves ragged. The client who trusted someone with their building. Watching a thing fail from a distance doesn't feel like winning. It just feels like watching something fail. What I did feel, and this caught me off guard, was relief that I wasn't carrying it anymore. My daughter applied to 5 schools. She got into 3 of them, including her first choice, a university with a strong civil engineering program. She told me at dinner, and I had to get up and refill my water because I didn't want her to see me get emotional over a plate of pasta. She said, "I want to build things. Like you." I said, "Build them better." She laughed. She said, "That's the plan." I'd been at the new company almost 18 months when I got a call from one of my former foremen. Not unusual. We'd stayed in touch. A few of the guys had. But his voice was different this time. He was quiet, direct. He said he was reaching out because 4 other people from the field team were thinking about leaving, together. He wanted to know if my new company was hiring. I told him I'd need to think about it. I said I'd make some calls. I did think about it. I thought about it for 2 days. There was a version of this that felt like poaching, and I didn't want to be that person. But these were experienced professionals making a free choice about their careers. The way I had? I talked to my boss at the new company. He told me to put together a staffing proposal. 3 of the 4 ended up coming over. Good hires, all of them. They knew the systems because they'd helped me build them the first time. The 4th called me separately about a month later. He stayed at the old company, said he had kids in school, didn't want the disruption. I understood that. We talked for an hour anyway. He told me more about what was happening there. Gavin had settled into the role, more or less. The owner had brought in a COO from outside to provide some guidance. Things had stabilized, different than before, quieter. He talks about you sometimes, the foreman said. The owner, Gavin. I didn't say anything. Not in a bad way, he said. More like he references things you built. The inspection checklist, the subcontractor rating system, uses them. Doesn't always know where they came from. I thought about that for a while after we hung up. There's a thing I've come to understand about work that I couldn't have articulated at 34, maybe not even at 40. The systems you build outlast you. They get attributed to whoever's standing in the room when someone else points at them. That used to bother me more than it does now. Now it just seems like the nature of things. You build something solid, it holds up. Doesn't matter whose name's on it. What matters whose name is on it? The only place that matters is at home. My daughter started college in the fall. Move-in day was a Saturday in August, blazing hot, the kind of heat where the parking lot shimmers and everyone's moving a little slower than they want to. We rented a van. My wife and I carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs while our daughter organized her bookshelf and pretended not to be nervous. On the drive home, my wife fell asleep in the passenger seat. I drove the empty van back through 4 hours of highway and thought about the rest stop parking lot in Greensboro, the family at the picnic tables, the kids running across the grass. I thought about what I'd been waiting for back then, sitting in that car. What I thought recognition was supposed to look like. A title on a door. A number on a check. Someone at the head of a table pointing at me. It doesn't look like that. It looked like my daughter saying she wants to build things. It looked like my wife saying I look like myself again. It looked like 3 guys I'd trained deciding to trust me a second time, even when they didn't have to. I pulled into our driveway just before dark. My wife woke up, looked around, said, "We're home." She sounded surprised, the way people do when they've slept through the long part of the drive. "Yeah," I said, "we are." I've been thinking a lot lately about what I was actually chasing for those 8 years. And I think the honest answer is that I wanted to be seen. Not famous, not rich, just seen. By one person, in one office, behind one mahogany desk. I built systems, I trained people, I drove through ice storms and slept on job sites, and underneath all of it was this quiet hope that eventually someone would point at what I'd done and say, "That was him. He built that." That's not a character flaw, it's just human. But here's what I've learned about needing that from the wrong source. It will hollow you out slowly. And you won't notice until you're sitting in a rest stop parking lot at dusk, wondering why you feel like a stranger to yourself. The owner wasn't a villain. I want to be clear about that. He was a father who loved his son and had the power to give him something, and he used that power. People do that. It doesn't make them evil. It makes them human in a different way than I'd hoped. What I had to reckon with was the gap between who I believed him to be, a man who rewarded merit, and who he actually was. That gap was my problem to solve, not his. What I did wrong wasn't staying too long. It was staying for the wrong reason. I stayed because I was afraid of what leaving would mean. I stayed because I'd organized my sense of self around being indispensable to that place, and walking away felt like admitting that hadn't counted for anything. But indispensable and valued are not the same thing. I was indispensable. I was not valued. And I let that confusion cost me 2 years. I won't get back. Gavin wasn't a bad person either. He was young and handed something he hadn't earned, which is a harder situation than it sounds. The people we give unearned things too. We don't do them any favors. He had to carry the weight of knowing, on some level, that the systems he was using were built by someone else. That the foreman tolerated him partly out of loyalty to a person who was no longer in the building. That's its own kind of burden. I don't envy it. What I know now is this. The quality of your work is a form of character. Not because it gets rewarded. Sometimes it doesn't, and that's a fact you have to make peace with. But because it shapes who you become. Every inspection checklist I wrote, every subcontractor relationship I maintained with honesty, every time I stayed on a site until the problem was solved instead of passing it down. That was me deciding over and over what kind of person I was going to be. That doesn't disappear when you change jobs. You take it with you. You plug it in somewhere new and it works the same way. Because it was never about the company. It was always about you. My daughter said she wants to build things like me. I cried about that in private, which I'm not embarrassed to admit, because what she saw wasn't the title I never got or the equity I should have had. She saw someone who showed up, did the work, and left with his integrity intact. That's the thing I'd been building all along without knowing it. And nobody, no owner, no son-in-law, no reorganized structure can promote someone else into that.